Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review of Better Call Saul Season 4, Episode 4, Talk. This video is part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Better Call Saul. So I have to start with a spoiler warning for Better Call Saul up to Season 4, Episode 4. If you haven't seen up to this point, you will not want to watch this video, otherwise some things will be spoiled for you. So, this episode, I gotta be honest, it was a split feeling for me because the Jimmy and Kim stuff, honestly, I wasn't really digging. Like, it was okay. I understand it's like a cog in a machine, but there's certain episodes of Better Call Saul, particularly in the mid-season, where I think they drag it out and moves. I know Better Call Saul is always slow-paced, and as I said, I actually love it for being slow-paced, but sometimes it can be a bit too slow and feel a bit too dragged out. And that's how I felt about particularly the Jimmy stuff in this episode, also the Kim stuff a bit. But what saved this episode for me is the Nacho and the Mike stuff. That stuff was amazing. It was really top notch, really engaged throughout. So it was kind of a split feeling in this episode. Half of it was kind of meh, and the other half was great, amazing. So let's get into this, and let me start with the Jimmy storyline. So it's kind of interesting. Like, we see it starts off where he gets a call and he gets a job offer for a cell phone, and his first reaction is to be like, yeah, nah, I think I'm going to have to pass. Which is a bit curious because, as we've seen in the previous, like, at the start of the season, like, he wanted to just go out and go to job interviews right away. Like, Kim was like, well, maybe you should just take some breaks, take some time to rest. He's like, no, I want to get out there. And he was going hard out doing job interviews. We already saw him turn down one, but that was because, like, basically he thought the guys were idiots because he managed to con them so easily. So he didn't really have respect for them. So that made sense. But here, it didn't seem like, because it seemed like they said they had time, they took time to think it over, and they offered him the position after, like, taking the time. So that wasn't the case here. Here, this cell phone company, they actually went through the process, they weren't idiots, and they offered them the job, yet he still turned it down. Which is kind of, I don't really know exactly where they're going with this. It seems like he's happier sort of being in a limbo state, and he doesn't want to commit to anything. Like, he wants to go out and do tons of job interviews to be active, but when it comes time to actually taking a job, he turned it down. So I don't know. That kind of, to be honest, like, it irritated me a little bit when I first saw this scene, but I'm willing to go with them if this is leading to something. And this is definitely having something to do with how Jimmy is affected by Chuck's death. So I'm curious to see where they'll take this. But then, as we see, Kim sort of pressures him to see a shrink, and you can tell, not pressure, she kind of just puts it out there lightly, but you can tell, and I think this is an amazingly acted scene, by the way. Both Bob Odenkirk and Rhea Seehorn, I think her name is, sorry for pronouncing it wrong, plays Kim. They did an amazing job in the scene because it was all in the subtext, and you could tell Jimmy's reaction to hearing that was very negative, but he was trying not to let it show. He was trying not to let that overcome them. And I do think this is a bigger sign of what Jimmy and Kim's relationship is becoming, because it seems like the relationship is actually devolving. And I think that's the journey we're going to go on this season. And I think that it has to do with how both of these characters are affected by Chuck's death, because I don't think it's just Jimmy. I think Kim is also, because we saw in the previous season, even before Chuck died, that she was feeling very guilty about the part she played in humiliating Chuck, and after his death, in which, how Howard stated was probably a suicide, so I'm sure she knows it was a suicide. I think she's feeling extremely guilty about that, and that is what is weighing her down. So I actually think that she needs to see a therapist just as much as Jimmy does. But it's interesting that she doesn't elect to, but she suggested Jimmy do it. And of course, he was like outright rejecting it. And then he brought up, oh yeah, by the way, I got a job at a cell phone company. So that was sort of a way to so it was, to me, it seemed it was a way to show that, no, I'm okay. I actually got a job. Don't worry about me. But she still says, oh, okay, that's good, but can you still see the therapist? And he's like, oh, yeah, sure, I'll consider it, which we know he's not going to do, because you could tell, again, great acting. You could tell from his reaction he was not on board with that and just repelled by the whole idea. And again, I think Kim's being a bit of a hypocrite by suggesting he see it, but not seeing one herself. Because it's obviously she's just as affected, if not more so. Well, I wouldn't say more so, but I say they're affected. They're reacting to it in very different ways. I'll put it that way. But they're both affected by Chuck's death. So he has to call up the cell because he told Kim that he has a job now, so he has to call them back and say, actually, I'll take the job. Hopefully it's still available, because otherwise he'd be caught in a big lie. Because he was like, oh, yeah, I start today, blah, blah, blah. So he goes and takes the job, and this is the part that I thought stretched on a bit. I know what you're going to say, and it's very obvious. That's the whole point of these scenes, is to show how monotonous and how boring this job was for Jimmy, and how bored he was by it. But that's a really risky thing to do. That's a double-edged thing to do in television and movies, and this happens a lot, where you have to portray the character being really bored, but it's always a risk to make that boring for the audience to watch. And I think sometimes I've seen some movies and shows that can pull this off. They can, get across to the audience how bored the characters are without making the audience feeling boring. I don't think this episode succeeded in that. I think it dragged on for too long. Because some people might like it and say, oh, it's meta because I feel bored and so I'm feeling what he's feeling. Where I don't agree with that. Sorry, just me personally. I think I would rather them get on with the episode and not. You could get across how bored he is without dwelling on it for that long. I just thought it was unnecessary, and I didn't really care for it very much. Because it showed that he was in, this, they put him in a branch that pretty much got no business whatsoever. And then, so he goes off and he sees Ira from the previous episode and gets the payout, which actually was a lot more than he thought. You could tell that was exciting for him. And so Ira's like, hey, you have any more jobs like this? And he's like, no, sorry, I don't. But then you can tell a few seconds later, he's like, oh, I'll come up with something. Because it's obvious that is exciting for him. That's what he wants to be doing. So this is a very interesting sort of character turning point for Jimmy. That this where we know where his storyline's going, to leading to Saul Goodman, and I don't know. This is kind of a point I think this show is hammered in enough already, so I didn't really need this to be hammered in again. That he finds the doing, the scamming and whatnot to be more exciting than the normal mundane stuff. This is something that the show is hammered a lot, but I think this season is going to be very important, because I think this is the season where he's going to actually really make strides into making that turn into that life. So it is important to rehash it here, but yeah, that was kind of interesting. Anyway, let me get into the Kim stuff. This was kind of interesting because they teased in the previous episode that she was going to the courthouse, and here we see that she's just going to watch. She's just watching these basic, low sort of. I wouldn't say criminal case, they're mostly like misdemeanors and stuff, and just a normal court. And she's sitting there watching it, and the judge sees her. And the judge, by the way, is played by Ethan Phillips, who plays Neelix on Star Trek Voyager. I recognized him right away. I was like, hey, that's Neelix. But anyway, so during the intermission, or the recess or whatever, he calls her into the thing and says, oh, I have a perfect case for you. It's about this woman who gave birth and she died from malpractice too, blah blah blah. And that was really interesting, because I was like on board with that until Kim's like, that's the plot of The Verdict, and he's like, yep, That's right. Because, and his whole point was to say that, real life isn't like the movies, that everything is, practicing the law isn't exciting or glamorous like Hollywood paints it to be. It's actually tedious and boring, so you should actually just go back to doing what you should do instead of sitting here watching this criminal case trying to find inspiration or whatever. Which I actually really like that. I thought that was really interesting. It's been a while since I've seen the verdict, so I didn't actually recognize it. I don't even remember the plot. I know I've seen the film before. I think it's got Paul Newman in it. But, yeah, I didn't recognize that plot at all when he was saying it. It wasn't until Kim pointed out that that's the plot of the verdict. But it's interesting. After that long spiel that Neelix gives her, she goes and sits back anyway. And it's funny to see his reaction as he's trying the next course and he looks over and sees Kim there. Now, that makes me think that he's not right about her. That the reason why she's going there and watching the cases isn't because she's trying to reinvigorate her love in the law or whatever, or it's because she wants to be like a TV lawyer or something like that. I think he's actually wrong. I'm not sure why she's doing it, but I think it has more to do with the guilt that she's feeling over Chuck's death than any wanting to be exciting lawyer or anything like that. So I'm really curious to see where this goes. But they didn't do that much with it in this episode, but it's setting us up for something, which I hope I have faith in the show that's going to lead to something really interesting. So I'm really curious to see where exactly that leads. Although it does make me wonder, because he did threaten her. He said, if I see you here again, I'm going to ask you to do the public defendant work, because we're very short-staffed in that. So it makes me wonder if he is going to do that, if he is going to force her to do that. It's like, all right, fine, you want to keep coming here? Here you are. You'd be a public defender. And maybe that's what she wants. I don't know. So again, it'll be interesting to see where this goes. Now, let me get into the nacho stuff. And this is stuff I enjoyed a hell of a lot more. I love this because it starts off with and this is so great. So the start of the episode kind of teased that the Gus's men were sort of setting up this other gang. They were giving them the car that Nacho identified, sort of, or seeing that they had the car or whatever, and they were setting them up to be for the attack against the Salamancas, so the Salamancas could retaliate. And of course Nacho's kind of in on it, because he says, yep, that's them, they're the ones who did it, I recognize that guy, which of course is total bullshit, but he's saying what Gus wants him to say. And so it's so great. The Salamanca's brothers or whatever, like, I used to call them Tuco's cousins back in Breaking Bad, but that doesn't seem to fit here. But they're always like, they were kind of, I almost would say that I like their use here better than I did in Breaking Bad, because they appeared in season 3 of Breaking Bad, and it kind of seemed like they were building them up to be these big, huge hard asses and showing them do all this scary shit and kill people, and then they didn't really do much. So it seemed pretty, I mean, they attacked Hank, but other than that, like, yeah, it seemed kind of anticlimactic. But here, I think they're being used much better, because they're not building them up as much as Breaking Bad did, because they're assuming that you've seen Breaking Bad, so you already know what badasses they are. And it's also interesting for those who haven't seen Breaking Bad, because they can still get across that they're badasses without all the unnecessary buildup. So I actually like their use better here. But it was so great, like when Nacho was talking about, okay, we're going to get the guys together, we can hit them tonight, I'll get this gang and that gang, and I'll get these people and organize things. And I knew it. I knew that they were just going to go out there and attack them themselves. Like, and of course, it's in their character, they didn't even like talk about it or anything. They just went in the backseat, grabbed a bag of guns from Nacho, and just walked off without a word. And I knew that they would end up killing all of them. And this is a great scene. I love the whole way it played out, particularly from that, like they showed it from Nacho's perspective, that they didn't even bother showing, from the other Salamanca brothers or whatever they're called. They're from their perspective. It's all from Nacho's perspective, as he could just hear the gunshots, and he feels like, well, I kind of need to do something. And I was thinking that when he was in the car watching this, I was thinking, he should probably go out and help, otherwise they might think less of him or not think that he's, on their side or whatever, and he wants to be in good status with them. So he tries to go out. He does shoot one guy, but then he, he's a lot more sort of careful about it and not sure what to do and how to help. And eventually, right when he's about to shoot again, the other brother comes up from behind him and shoots for him. And he's just splattered in blood. But they did, sort of, do the hand clasps to congratulate. So he does. I think they give him an A for effort for at least trying to help them out a bit, even though he didn't do much. So he's still in good standing with them, is what I'm saying. But that whole scene, and of course it shows the badasses that they are, that they can just go out and take out an entire gang by themselves, which is kind of what I expected. It was just crazy. But then you see Nacho meet up with Gus, and sort of he lays it out that what Gus's whole plan was basically is to frame this whole gang so they can wipe them out and take their territory. And he says that Salamancas aren't in a position to take over their territory, so obviously the cartel's going to give it to him. And this is interesting because, again, I love this Gus. We're getting his sort of origin story because we see at the part of Breaking Bad, we see he already has a lot of power and high standing in the cartel. In fact, too much, because in season 4 of Breaking Bad, the cartel attack. They have a little war with Gus to try to take back his territory because they think he's taking too much power from them. And so here we're getting the backstory of how he accumulated all this power, which is very interesting. And it's also interesting, and it's so Gus. Again, I love getting scenes with Gus. It's so true to his character. They're so consistent between this show and Breaking Bad, where after Nacho points this out, and which is Gus just gives him the stink eye, which is you better be careful. But what he says is, you should go home and rest. You have more to do. And that's just a perfect kind of dialogue that's so consistent with Gus. And it's a backhanded way of saying, I'm not done with you yet. You're not out of this. You're going to have to do a lot more stuff for me. And of course, he was he still, as we saw in the previous scene, that he was still very hurt by his injuries. He still had the gunshot wound. The vet that he went to sort of fixed him up and said he should go to the hospital, but he never did. And then again, I love the next scene where you see, at his father's house, you see his father coming home, and he's just saying, get out of here, leave, I don't want you here. And of course, he's in the dark before he even sees him. He just knows he's home, but as soon as he turns on the light, he sees that he's completely injured with gunshot wounds. Completely changes demeanor. And again, I really love this character. He's a really lovable guy who wants nothing to do with crime or criminals or anything like that. But he loves his son. And so when he sees him shot up and bleeding on the couch, he can't, he completely changes his tune, of course, and is I'm going to call hospital, and he starts to call the 911, but you see Nacho's if you do, I won't be safe. And so that stops him, and he puts down the phone. And that is a very touching scene. I really love that scene. It also explains why Nacho didn't take the vet's advice and go to hospital, because he believes that if he does go to hospital, maybe the Salamancas, maybe Gus, who or maybe both, won't be happy with this and will kill him for it. So he has to just ride out his wounds. Which is, it's just a really good scene. Anyway, let me finally end on what I think was the strong point of this episode, and that is the Mike storyline. I love, and we get the start of the episode starts out with the scene with the little boy playing and writing his name in the cement or whatever, and then it cuts to Mike saying, so you wanted me to talk, so I talked. And of course I was like, what the hell? I didn't get it. I was hoping it would be explained later in the episode, and thankfully it was. So the little boy was obviously Mike's son, Maddie. So it was. If you think about it, it was a really artistic way of showing that that's what he was sort of thinking about at the time. That it's kind of a good contrast to the way that Chuck and Kim are so affected by Chuck, sorry, Freudian slip there. Jimmy and Kim are so affected by Chuck's death. There's a good contrast to that we see Mike is still affected by his son's death. And of course, he goes to these meetings that they introduced in the previous season that his daughter or daughter-in-law wants him to go to talk about their his son's death or whatever. And it's interesting because we get this woman, I'm blanking on her name at the moment, but she was introduced in the previous season. And it starts to make me wonder if she was introduced has a love interest for Mike. I'm still not. We don't see her in Breaking Bad, so if she is a love interest for Mike, it's not one that sticks very long. But it is interesting. They might not go that way. They were definitely wanting the hint that there was something there when they went and had the lunch or brunch together, or whatever, at the cafe, at the diner, I should say. Sorry. Yeah, so there's definitely something there, but whether or not it would actually go anywhere, I'm not entirely sure. But it's interesting seeing their reaction because she wants him to ditch the meeting or whatever, the grieving meeting, whatever you call it, to go out to a concert with her, and he's like, no, I have to because I'm doing this for his daughter-in-law. And it's obvious that he is just doing it to placate her, but he wants her to feel better, so it's worth it in his eyes. But then he points out that one of the guys at the meeting is a liar. And so they sort of make a joke out of it, and they make a bet, and it's like, oh, because she doesn't believe him. And of course we know he's right because he's Mike. Mike's really awesome at telling stuff like that, so he's right. But they make a little bet, they joke about it, ha ha ha. But when they go to the actual meeting, you can tell that Mike's not in the joking mood anymore. And again, this is another amazingly acted scene where his daughter-in-law starts to talk about her feelings and how she was upset she didn't even think about Maddie or whatever, and how she's still affected by his death. And this is just amazing. I was just looking at Mike's performance while she was talking, and this was like an amazing performance with no dialogue. You could tell how seething he was, how angry, and it was really greatly acted. Like through each has her little story progressed, you could tell he was getting progressively worse, and his breathing was more heavy, and you could tell that he was just seething inside with anger, that this was pissing him the fuck off. I wasn't sure why at the time, but I could just tell that he was not happy that she was saying that story. And then the other guy walks in who's the liar, and it's funny, he's played by the actor who's on The Good Place. He plays like a demon or whatever on The Good Place. But it's interesting. So he comes in and he talks about his ex-wife or his wife that died, which obviously never existed. So Mike just lets out on him, points it out, and of course the other lady who he told about it before is kind of like, Mike, that's probably not best to do it. But you could tell that unlike before when he was chatting about it before, it was more of a fun bet. Oh, this is fun. He didn't really care about it, but you could tell here it pissed him off, that he was angry about it. He was very pissed off, and that's why he was unleashing on him. It had nothing to do with him, really. It had to do with his anger of what his daughter-in-law had just said, and basically about the whole group. So they do explain why he's so pissed off. He's against the concept of the whole group. He thinks it's sort of people wallowing in their own grief and pity, and sort of feeding off of the grief and pity in others, which is what he thinks he exemplifies in this one dude who specifically is just lying, making up a story so he can kind of get almost a fetish enjoyment out of people's grief. And so Mike finds that disgusting, or at least this is from Mike's perspective. He thinks the whole concept is disgusting. He thinks it's just people taking almost fetish type enjoyment out of wallowing in other people's grief, and so he's very much against it. So he just lashes out against the guy and proves him wrong, and he walks up and leaves, and then he just attacks the whole group. So it shows the kind of headspace that Mike is in at the moment, and I think it was really amazing. And so Later, we get a scene with Mike. He's at, doing his job as a security consultant, and they show just what a hard ass he is. Like, the other person's like, "Oh, the strap may be a little bit frayed, but it's kind of fine." Mike just stares him down. He's like, "So you want us to have all these replaced?" And he's like, "Is that even a question?" And it's just, he's such a hard. I hate working with people like that, but it shows the type of character he is, and it makes complete sense for his character. It's really amazing. But then he gets a call from Gus. Not from Gus, from Gus's goon, saying he wants to see you. So he has to go have a meeting with Gus. Now, this is a scene I really want to talk about, because this actually proves a couple of my theories wrong. Maybe. So Gus is basically like, goes to Mike, is like, we can't really, our little arrangement can't continue unless we talk about something. So is there something you want to tell me? And Mike's like, "Oh, well, you mean about Nacho." So basically, Gus is pissed off at Mike for not telling him that Nacho is trying to kill Hector Salamanca, because he doesn't want Hector Salamanca to be killed. And Mike's just like, "Look, I told you I wouldn't kill him. I never agreed to be his bodyguard," which was very interesting. So the reason why I say this kind of disproves some of my theory, because I had the theory in the previous season that Mike did tell Gus about it, and Gus wanted Nacho to sort of, not to kill Hector, but to paralyze him, to make him in worse condition, and so that he actually helped it happen. But now we see that's not the case, and I don't know. I'm a bit disappointed in that, because I understand Gus doesn't want Hector to die, but it seems like he would want Hector to be hurt. He would want the Salamanca's position to be damaged, which it is. But maybe he was just hoping to do that himself over time, and not just interference, even though it expedited things. It actually sort of interfered because it put Hector's life in danger, which is the last. He doesn't want Hector to die. He wants him to suffer a long life. But it seems like, since we know what actually ultimately happens to Hector from Breaking Bad, it seems like this is actually the result he would want, that Hector's still alive, but he's in a miserable, paralyzed state. But at this point in time, they're not sure if Hector's going to pull through, if he's going to make it, so he's still very pissed off about the prospect of Hector actually dying. So my theory is wrong. Mike didn't tell Gus about Nacho. He actually, and part of my theory was that Gus is actually helping Nacho to do it, which apparently is also incorrect. That Gus, it seems to me, what I get from the scene is that Gus didn't know Nacho was going to do it, but once Nacho did it, he knew instantly it was Nacho who did it. Like, he recognized immediately that he switched to pills or whatever, but he didn't know beforehand that Nacho was going to do it. But once he did, he took advantage of that and used Nacho as a spy or whatever. So that's a very, very interesting reveal. And so I'm not sure exactly how Gus knows that Mike knew that Nacho was going to do that. To my knowledge, that part of it was not revealed in the show yet. How Gus, but I guess Gus knows everything. He tracks people and listens to their stuff. So he obviously didn't know this beforehand, but he somehow found out after the fact that Mike was aware of this. But what's interesting is that I'm pretty sure, because this whole thing with Nacho and Hector happened a while ago. So I'm pretty sure Gus knew about Mike's involvement a while ago, and he's just bringing this up now. And this makes sense when Mike says, "Look, you're not here to berate me for this. You're actually here because you want to use me in another job, so just get on with it." And that's the point. So that explains it. That explains why he waited to confront Mike about it, because it's not really about confronting Mike. He's just using that as an excuse to kind of blackmail him or get him to do whatever he wants him to do next. And I love how Mike was able to see through that. It's just, and again, this is, I think, is building, because we know where Gus and Mike's relationship is going, and this is really building to Gus learning to trust him and appreciate his skills. Because at this point in time, I don't think he truly did, although I think he does to an extent. because you already see what he was able to do with the truck and everything, and he already sees a lot of his abilities. But the fact that Mike was able to see through Gus's subterfuge, I think is actually going to impress him even more. And more than that, I love Mike's reaction here, where, because most people would be intimidated by Gus, they'd be scared or whatever, and Mike is just like, he was brazen. He didn't give a shit. He just went right up and charged towards Gus, even though the goons were surrounding him, and he wasn't intimidated because he knew that Gus, it wasn't because he has a death wish, but it's because he knew that Gus wasn't going to kill him. He knew why Gus actually called him here is because he wanted to use him. And so, and the fact that he was just so like brazen, and plus we know Mike's state of mind at this point, where he's still really upset and pissed off over the whole thing with the group and everything, so he just doesn't give a shit. And so I think that also is going to really impress Gus, the fact that Mike just wasn't scared of him, is very brazen, and that's someone he could really use. So I'm really curious to see what it is that Gus wants to use Mike for. And that scene was amazing. I love that scene. That was a great way to end the episode. Seeing a scene like that just made me think this episode was amazing. Anyway, my rating for Talk out of 10, I think I'm going to give this episode a 7. Like the Mike stuff, particularly that last scene, makes me want to give this a higher score. But then the Jimmy stuff, with him like sitting in the store throwing the ball, that makes me want to give it a lower score. So I think I'll meet in the middle and give this a 7. Very good. Which is, yeah, it's a pretty good score for this. It's I think it was, as I said, like part of the episode was amazing, the other part was kind of tedious. So it's kind of back and forth. I think it is better than most of these middling episodes of Better Call Saul tend to be, so I take solace in that. It's a pretty strong episode, and I have really high hopes that this season is going to be the best season of the show yet. And I think it's going to go into amazing places, but I don't want to put my expectations too high because that's setting myself up for disappointment. But I do have high hopes for this show. Anyway, that is it for my review of Talk. I'll be back here every week to review each episode of Better Call Saul, so be sure to check that out. Also check out my channel as I do other videos and other shows like Star Trek, Game of Thrones, The Expanse, and more, so be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.